The call light above, room 412, was still blinking when Brynn walked up to the nurse's station and slid a cream-colored card across the counter. "I wanted you to hear it from me first," she said. Farah picked it up without thinking. Cordell's name was on it, so was Brynn's. The card announced an engagement. She was still holding it, still forming words somewhere between her throat and her mouth, when she looked up and noticed what she had missed at first glance. Brynn had her coat belted, but the fabric pulled tight across her middle. The shape beneath it was unmistakable. She was pregnant. 3 months earlier, Cordell had come to Farah's apartment after midnight, his voice unsteady, his eyes already past the point of listening. He'd held up his phone and shown her an email she had never written, her name in the sender field. A message to Dr. Ashford, the cardiologist who had joined the hospital that quarter, written in the kind of language that could only mean one thing. He had accused her of going behind his back for months. He had said things about where she came from and what he should have expected, and then he had left. Brynn had been sitting at the dinner table the whole time. Brynn had been the one who told Farah not to go after him. Now Farah understood why. She set the card on the counter. "You're pregnant," she said. Brynn nodded, once, small, controlled. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed this and was not afraid of how it landed. Farah did not say anything for a long moment. The ICU was quiet behind her. Down the hall, a monitor beeped twice and settled. She thought about the email. She thought about every time she had called Brynn after a hard shift, every secret she had handed over like something precious, every time she had put in a good word at work without being asked. She picked up the card and slid it back across the counter. "I hope you're happy," she said. She meant neither word. Brynn took the card and left, and Farah went back to her patients, because that was what she had always done. They had grown up in Senatobia, Mississippi, not in the same neighborhood exactly, but close enough that they had ridden the same school bus from second grade onward and spent most of their childhoods in each other's orbit. Farah's family had a small house near the county road. Brynn's family lived about 2 miles east. Both sets of parents worked hard and came up short in the way that a lot of people in small southern towns do, not from lack of trying, but from circumstances that accumulate quietly over generations. What drew them together early was the way they were different from the people around them. Farah was methodical, the kind of student who read chapters twice before class and asked the kinds of questions that slowed everyone else down. Brynn was quicker, sharper at reading a room, funnier in the way that gets you through a place where being too earnest gets you noticed for the wrong reasons. They balanced each other. By high school, they were each other's first call for most things. They applied to nursing school together. Farah got in on the first attempt. Brynn did not. Farah held her spot and reapplied the following year so they could enter together. She told Brynn it was because she didn't want to navigate the first semester alone, and that was partly true. The full truth was that she couldn't imagine being somewhere Brynn wasn't. At the University of Memphis, the gap between them became harder to ignore. Farah's clinical evaluations were consistently strong. Instructors remembered her name. During their final practicum, the charge nurse at the training site told Farah directly that she had a future in critical care if she wanted one. Brynn struggled through pharmacology twice. She made it through and she graduated, but the experience left something behind. A quiet bruise that didn't show but had never fully healed. After graduation, both of them moved into a midtown apartment and joined Memphis Regional Medical Center. Farah applied for a nursing position on the progressive care unit. Brynn applied for a unit secretary role. Farah had called her floor manager, Deneen, before Brynn's application even went in and said, "She's reliable, she's good with people, and she knows how to manage a busy station. I'd vouch for her." Brynn got the position. For 4 years, they made that apartment work the way two people do when neither of them can afford to do things differently, and they also happen to love each other's company. They knew which nights were hard for the other without having to ask. They built inside jokes about specific physicians and specific patients, and the particular misery of working a weekend holiday. Farah thought she knew Brynn the way you only know someone after years of proximity and shared inconvenience. She was wrong on both counts. Cordell had joined Memphis Regional as a surgical resident. He had grown up in East Memphis, in a family that had been in the city long enough that his grandfather's name was on a wing of a different hospital across town. He was not unkind. He was also used to things going the way he expected, which is a different thing from being unkind but can cause the same damage in the end. He noticed Farah at a department meeting and found reasons to pass through her floor. He left coffee on the nurse's station on mornings she had the early shift. He asked her out, and she said no. He asked again. He asked 9 more times over the course of several months, and at some point the persistence shifted from something she brushed off to something she thought about. She finally agreed because she got tired of saying no, and because when he was being genuinely himself instead of performing, she could see something in him that she respected. They went to dinner, and then again, and by March she had introduced him to Brynn over takeout at the apartment, and by May, she had gone to his parents' house for the first time. Millicent was not openly hostile. She was the kind of woman who communicated disapproval through what she didn't say. The pause before she answered a question, the way she looked at Farah's clothes before looking at her face, the careful way she talked about Cordell's future. She mentioned a woman named Lauren, whose family had been at the same country club for 3 generations, in a way that felt less like a comment and more like a suggestion. Farah drove home afterward and told Brynn everything. Brynn had said, "She sounds exhausting. Don't let her make you feel like you're not enough." Farah had held on to that for weeks. She did not know that Brynn had started calling Millicent privately about 2 months later. What Farah also didn't know, what she was piecing together slowly in the days after Brynn left the ICU with the engagement card, was the full shape of what her best friend had been carrying. They had both grown up poor. They had both come to Memphis with the same thin margin for error. But somewhere along the way, Brynn had started keeping a private ledger. Every time Farah got a better evaluation, a stronger recommendation, a supervisor who remembered her name, Brynn recorded it, not with any intention she could have put into words, but as a feeling that hardened over time into something else. When Cordell started following Farah around the hospital with coffee cups and consult requests, Brynn had already tried twice to draw his attention toward herself. He had barely noticed her. His eyes were always on Farah, in the way that eyes tend to fix on the person who gives them nothing, who isn't performing for the room. To Brynn, Farah's modesty looked like an act. They had grown up in the same kind of house, wanted the same kind of life. Farah's discomfort with Cordell's money and family background read to Brynn as pretense, as the luxuries of someone who didn't really need those things because everything kept coming to her anyway. The cooking she'd done for Brynn during lean semesters, the references she'd given freely, the apartment she'd helped find. To Farah, these things were simply what you did for someone you loved. To Brynn, each one was another mark in the ledger, another reason to resent the hand that kept helping her. The resentment had no clean beginning. It had grown the way certain things grow, slowly, quietly, in the dark, until it was large enough to act on. The email went out on a Tuesday evening at 7:48:17. After Farah clocked out and left the building. Farah's workstation had still been logged in when Brynn passed the station. The session had been open from a note Farah had been drafting before a patient situation pulled her away, and she'd forgotten to lock the screen before she left. It took Brynn less than 5 minutes. She drafted the message to Dr. Ashford. She sent it from Farah's account to a personal email address she controlled, and from there she forwarded it to Cordell with a line that read, "I found this and I didn't know what to do. I'm so sorry." Then she deleted the outgoing message from Farah's sent folder, closed the session, and walked to the parking structure at 7:52. She had timed herself. She knew exactly how long it took. Cordell saw the message that evening and called Brynn before he drove to the apartment. Brynn told him she was as shocked as he was, that she'd hoped there was an explanation, that she didn't want to be in the middle of it. She said all the right things in the right order, and when Cordell arrived at the apartment and said the wrong things, Brynn sat at the dinner table and played her role. The distressed friend, the reluctant witness, the one trying to hold the situation together. After Cordell left, after Farah cried on the couch, after Brynn said don't go after him, it won't help, Brynn went home and called Millicent. She had been building that relationship for 2 months at that point. She had started by reaching out after a hospital event Millicent had attended, framing it as concern for Cordell, offering to keep her informed in the way a genuine friend of the family might. Millicent had warmed to it quickly, because she had never fully trusted Farah, and here was someone offering her the back channel she'd been hoping for. Brynn had fed her things that sounded like facts, that Farah kept Cordell at arm's length because she had other options, that he was one of several men she was managing. After the email, Brynn called Millicent and said, "It happened the way I told you it might. I'm sorry. I thought she was better than this." Millicent had already believed her. The email was simply confirmation. In the weeks that followed, Farah did what she had always done when her life fell apart. She went back to work, and she went harder. She added shifts. She stayed late when the ICU was short-staffed. She reviewed protocols, caught a medication discrepancy that could have been serious, and spent an extra 40 minutes with a patient's daughter, who had driven 6 hours and hadn't slept. Deneen noticed. The kind of notice that 6 weeks later turned into a conversation in her office about the charge nurse position. Farah took the role. It was more pressure and more responsibility, and she was better at it than she expected. The fact that she was better at it than she expected made her quietly furious at herself for spending so long being afraid of what Millicent thought. She met Beckett on a Saturday she almost hadn't gone in for. A colleague had asked her to cover a half shift to drop off some discharge charting. It wasn't her floor and it wasn't her patient, and she wouldn't have been there at all, except she had said yes without thinking. She came up the elevator, walked past the family waiting room, and stopped because the man sitting inside had the specific posture of someone who had been in that same chair for too many hours. She asked who he was waiting on. He told her it was his father. She told him she'd see what she could find out. It was not her job, and she did it anyway. By the time she came back with an update, something in his face had changed in the way a person's face changes when someone has finally shown up. He thanked her, and she started to leave, and he asked her name. She told him. On Thursday, he came back with 2 coffees and a quiet kind of certainty that he had been hoping she'd still be there. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, "and I was hoping you'd let me buy you dinner sometime." She told him she'd think about it. He said he'd come back Thursday regardless. She found herself looking forward to Thursday in a way she hadn't expected and didn't immediately know what to do with. She said yes to dinner in the 3rd week of their acquaintance. He asked about work and actually listened. He mentioned his father's recovery without making it an occasion for performance. When she told him she'd grown up in Senatobia, he didn't slow down or change his expression in any way that suggested the information mattered to him beyond being part of who she was. She noticed the absence of that reaction the way you notice a sound stopping. Cordell came to the ICU one afternoon in November, 3 weeks before Brynn delivered the engagement card. He came during a slow period, without a clinical reason to be there, and stood at the nurse's station with his hands in his coat pockets. "I heard your charge up here now," he said. "I am," Farah said without looking up from the chart she was reviewing. He was quiet for a moment. "Who is it? The guy I keep hearing you mentioned." Farah set down her pen. "Cordell, you're not assigned to this unit. If you have a patient consult, I can find someone for you. Otherwise, I have things to manage." His jaw moved the way it did when he was deciding whether to say the thing he actually wanted to say. "You moved on fast." "You made a decision without letting me speak," she said evenly. "That was yours to make. I'm not available to keep paying for it." He looked at her for a moment, with the expression of someone who had expected a different reaction and wasn't sure what to do with the one he got. Then he left. She picked up her pen. Her hand was steady. She noticed that specifically, that her hand was steady. Shiloh had worked on the progressive care floor for 3 years, and was, by all accounts, someone who kept her head down and did her job without drama. She was not the kind of person who usually walked into the HR office on a Wednesday morning without an appointment. But she had been carrying something for months, and it had gotten heavier. Now Brynn was engaged to the doctor who had broken up with Farah. Farah was running the ICU. And the things Shiloh had been sitting with had become too heavy to keep sitting with. She told HR what had happened that Tuesday evening. The time. The terminal. The fact that Brynn had asked her to step away for a few minutes to handle something private on the station. She had thought nothing of it then. She had only started to understand later when the story about the email spread through the floor, the way stories spread through hospital floors, fast and complete by the end of a single shift. IT pulled the access log for the station. The audit trail was intact. The server had stored every keystroke from the open session, including the full draft history of the message, and the draft had been created 37 seconds after Shiloh's keycard showed her leaving the floor. Farah's swipe out was logged at 7:31. Brynn's keycard exit was logged at 7:52. The email had been sent at 7:48. Brynn had used Farah's open session. She had sent the message from Farah's account. She had deleted it from the sent folder before walking out. HR presented the findings to Brynn on a Friday and asked her to respond. She said very little. She was suspended that afternoon and terminated 2 weeks later, after the formal review confirmed what the logs had already shown. Farah was informed on a Wednesday morning before her shift. She sat in the HR director's office and looked at the document on the table in front of her. The timestamps, the session data, everything laid out in columns. And she thought about Brynn catching the apartment door the night Cordell left. She thought about don't go after him, it won't help. She thanked them for telling her. Then she went to the ICU and began her shift. Millicent had come around to Brynn the way she came around to situations she couldn't change, not with warmth, but with practical acceptance. The pregnancy had made the engagement a matter of fact, and Millicent was nothing if not practical about facts. But she was also a woman who had spent 40 years learning to read the people around her, and something about the timeline had never sat right. She raised it over a dinner in January calmly, as though she were noting something minor. "I think we should do a paternity test," she said. Cordell started to object. Millicent said she wasn't asking. Brynn said it wasn't necessary. Millicent said she would find it very difficult to move forward with any planning until they had certainty, and she said it in a tone that made clear the planning would not be moving forward until they did. The test was arranged. The result came back in 2 weeks. Cordell was not the father. He received the result by phone, standing in the hospital parking structure, and he stayed there for a long time after the call ended. He had known Farah for over a year before he accused her of something she hadn't done. He had believed a message that turned out to be fabricated. He had trusted the woman who fabricated it, and the pregnancy that had made him feel, however reluctantly, like he was doing something right, had nothing to do with him at all. He thought about the night he went to Farah's apartment, the way she had looked at him when he held up his phone, the way she had said, "I didn't send that." Not frantically, not with the performance of someone caught in something, but with the flat clarity of someone telling the truth that is not being heard. He did not reach out to her. Some reckonings you go through alone, and he understood, standing in that parking structure, that he had earned this one. Brynn left the house she had moved into with Cordell. She was unemployed, the engagement was finished, and the HR investigation had reached enough people at Memphis Regional that any reference from her former floor would be carefully worded at best. The position she had built, the connections she had leveraged, the life she had assembled through the years she and Farah had both been in Memphis. It had come apart in about 6 weeks. She went back to Senatobia for a while. She came back eventually because there was nothing left in Senatobia to return to. She found work where she could, and people who knew what had happened said things she had no answer for. Farah was offered a director-level position in the spring, oversight of 3 ICU units across the hospital system. She deferred twice and then accepted. She updated her credentials, expanded her scope, and learned how to manage the kind of budget and staffing decisions she had previously only seen from the outside. The work was harder, and she was better at it than she had expected, and both of those things felt right. What she hadn't known until a colleague mentioned it over lunch in February was that Beckett owned 2 private practices in Memphis and had been building a third. He had not volunteered this information, not because he was hiding it, but because, as he explained when she asked him directly, he had learned that mentioning it early changed what people wanted to talk to him about. He had wanted her to know him before she knew that. When she found out and he told her this simply, and waited to see what she did with it, she thought about Cordell and Millicent, and every evening she had spent managing her sense of her own worth against someone else's measuring stick, and she understood exactly why Beckett had kept it to himself. She did not love him less for it. They got married in late May, in her parents' backyard in Senatobia, with string lights Gabby had spent 2 weekends putting up, and a catering spread that Louise had partly organized, and partly decided to augment with her own cooking, because she did not fully trust a caterer to get the potato salad right. Beckett's family drove from Nashville. His mother and Louise found each other at the drink table within 15 minutes, and spent most of the reception in the kind of conversation that happens between 2 women who have both been hoping for the same thing for a long time. Leonard had liked Beckett from the second dinner. He had said to Farah privately in the kitchen, after that dinner, "He doesn't seem like he needs you to be smaller." Farah had thought about that for weeks before she understood exactly what he meant. The ceremony was at 4 o'clock, when the light was long and soft and starting to turn everything gold. Leonard walked her out. Gabi was already crying. Louise was not yet crying, which was how Farah knew her mother was saving it. She was standing near the reception table afterward, watching Beckett accept a plate from one of her aunts, with the particular ease of someone who knows how to receive a kindness graciously, when she heard footsteps on the gravel path that ran along the side of the property. She turned and saw Brynn standing at the edge of the yard. She almost didn't recognize her at first. Brynn looked quieter than Farah remembered. Quieter in the way that comes from something being removed from a person rather than added. She was holding a small gift bag and standing on the gravel, not the grass, as though she understood the line between the two. I wasn't invited, Brynn said. I know, I'm not staying. Farah waited. I needed to say it once, Brynn said. I hated you, for years, not because you did anything wrong, because you never seemed to do anything wrong, and I was so tired of watching you land on your feet every single time. I was tired of being second in the same rooms, the same job, with the same person. I thought if I just took one thing. She stopped. She looked down at the bag in her hands. I took the wrong thing, and I lost everything I'd actually built in the process. She set the bag down on the gravel. I'm not asking you to say anything, she said. I just couldn't be the person who never said it. She turned to go. Brynn, Farah said. Brynn stopped. I hope you stop looking at other people's lives long enough to figure out what you actually want from yours. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't an invitation. It was the truest thing Farah had, and she meant it. Brynn nodded once. She picked up the bag from the gravel and walked back down the path. Farah watched her until she was past the fence line, and then she turned around. Gabby was calling from across the yard. The lights had come on against the darkening sky. Leonard was laughing at something Beckett had just said. The full laugh, the one he reserved for things that actually surprised him. Louise was looking at Farah across the crowd with the expression she'd had since Farah was small. I see you. I'm proud of you. Come here. Farah walked toward all of it. She walked toward the lights and the noise, and the people who had shown up because they wanted to, not because they were calculating what they stood to gain. She walked toward the man who had driven 2 hours to a waiting room on the worst day of his life and had shown up every Thursday since with coffee and no expectations. She walked toward her father's laugh and her mother's arms and her sister already reaching for her hand. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her that she still needed. If this story moved you, please like and share it with someone who needed to hear it today. We'll see you in the next one.